All right, hello there. This is Michael Rubino here, and we have another Mold Talks, and I have a very special guest today, and her name is Allison. And Allison, first off, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell everyone why you're here?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Allison, and I am a certified holistic health coach, and I specialize in working with women with Hashimoto's disease. And like so many people, I too have Hashimoto's disease and have been on the roller coaster journey that comes with having this disease. And excited to share my story about mold because it's definitely tied to Hashimoto's disease, and it's just a crazy connection that I've personally struggled with over so many years. So,
Yeah, no, and thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your story with me here today. And I definitely want to talk about how that there is that tied together, because I can tell you from firsthand experience, I've had several clients with dealing with mold exposure that have been diagnosed with Hashimoto's, and would love to, kind of dive in your input on that as well. So we'll start with kind of building this timeline of your mold journey, and then we're gonna get into that. So when was it that you first noticed you weren't feeling well?
Yeah, I noticed I wasn't feeling well probably in 2013. So a long time ago. I believe I was living in an apartment at the time that was moldy.
Okay.
And then and then a couple years later, I had started my career as an elementary school teacher and started not to feel well. So yeah, it's been quite a journey. I've either been living in it or working in it over the past probably 9 years. So it's
Wow.
been in and out of exposures. And I think, most people I think suspect they have it at their home, but they don't always think about their work environment and how it could be affecting them there. I think for me, a lot of it was my school, the school that I was teaching at. My ceiling tile was black, literally
Wow.
black. And I think it's really common in a lot of schools, and why we're seeing such an increase in children getting Hashimoto's disease too. I've had so many parents come to me like, why does my 6-year-old have this? And I'm like, well, check their school for mold too. So it's just been a crazy journey between living in it and working in it and all of that. So it's been over the years, that's kind of where it started. And then getting out of the environment and then back into living in the environment a couple years later. It's just been crazy journey. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, well, definitely a testament to school funding. Not only do we need money for our great teachers, but we also need to, be able to look at and fix schools, because this is not the first time that I've heard or firsthand seen problems inside schools. And I think there's, we have our teachers to consider, we have our kids to consider. These are environments where you spend 8 hours a day, right? And so it's really important, especially if it's following you on both fronts. You're 8 hours inside school and 16 hours inside home, and you can't escape it. It's going to create, these issues that you just, no matter what supplements you're taking, no matter what program you're following, you're still living inside the problem.
Anyone who's in the education field knows that they like to kind of pretend that mold doesn't exist or that it's not a problem because they don't have the money to fix it. So
Yeah, no,
kind of an
true.
uphill battle for educators. I've worked in elementary schools, I've worked in higher education, and the same kind of process happens in their buildings as well. They're just old and not taken care of, and then people end up getting really sick and they can't figure out why. And it's just sad because there's so
Yeah.
many people sitting in those first, all day, like you said. So
No, it is sad, and a different fight for a different day, but definitely it's one of the reasons why I'm starting the Healthy Home Initiative. Although it says Healthy Home, it's really meant to just be a healthy environment. So it's geared towards fixing homes, fixing schools, buildings, etc. But anyways, yeah, that's a different topic for a different day, but something that I'm extremely passionate about. thank you for all you do in teaching our children here. And hopefully, they can turn things around with respects to the mold inside the workplace, because it's a big problem, something that we're not aware of. And, kind of creating this awareness together here today, it does shed an important topic on this, because if people don't know, then there's really no demand for change. And so, by creating this demand for change, we can, together as an army of people, move mountains, right? And our politicians I don't think they really know that they should be focusing on mold much more than they currently are, to be honest. It just seems to be the sentiment when I reach out to certain people, just their lack of knowledge. It kind of really showcases that it's just a big problem that there's not enough awareness around. So the good work that we're doing here today, creating that awareness is important. How did you first figure out that mold was impacting your health?
Yeah, I mean, I started to notice a difference. I would go on vacation, or I would house sit for a friend, and a lot of my symptoms started to kind of dissipate and disappear. And then I'd go back home, or I'd go back, into my work environment, and they would come roaring back. And so then I was making the connection between, my environment and my symptoms, and was able to kind of pinpoint that there was something to what was going on where I was living or where I was working with, where I was. So it was almost immediate how well I felt outside of the environment.
Wow. So it's like you could tell immediately.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I had rashes all over my hands and my arms, and just, the fatigue and, all the symptoms that come with mold. And then I just remember house sitting for a friend for a week. And after that week, I was just like, I feel so much better. Like, what happened? What shifted? And then I would go back into my house, and all of this stuff would come
right
roaring back again.
Yeah.
And I was just like, okay, like there's something to this. So that's how I was able to kind of make the connection.
So about how long after? So you said in 2013, you noticed that you started to not feel yourself. You started to feel worse. How long did it take you to connect the dots with mold? Was it, a few months, a few years?
Yeah, I mean, I was, I had gone from doctor to doctor, even natural doctor to doctor. And, no one really pinpointed it for me. And I had massive food allergies. Like, I couldn't eat anything. I tested highly allergic to 87 out of 97 foods on a food allergy panel, and couldn't figure out why I was only able to eat like 4 foods in my diet. And
Wow.
I mean, and I knew at the time, like when I was teaching, I was really stressed. So I'm like, maybe it's just stress. And it definitely was probably a factor in that too.
Sure.
You don't think like environmental stress can also like perpetuate even more stress on the body. And so after going from doctor to doctor and figuring and, trying to figure things out, I actually got really fed up with a workplace situation where I was working for a local community college and was really symptomatic. And they were trying to move me into a building that I was feeling really sick in. And I refused. And, HR doesn't believe like anything this is happening, right? So I had to provide proof. So I
Right.
basically tried to like get my point across that this was affecting me. So I went and advocated for myself at the doctor and said, I need this, test run for me. Came back, I had elevated levels of mold in my body. And it was just a really frustrating process, because I think with autoimmunity, we already feel like nobody understands us, nobody gets it. And then you add the element of mold, and the same cycle happens again with people just not understanding and, just like you said, being uneducated about it. So I literally sat there across from 5 other people telling me that I'm crazy, that there's nothing wrong with the building. Everything is fine. They tested it. It was in range with according to OSHA standards. And I was like, well, your tests are not accurate because I have it in my body and here's a test to prove it. So, and their mouths dropped to the floor because they were like, I'm sure worried about a lawsuit happening because,
Sure.
there's so much pick. So
Well, especially since OSHA doesn't regulate mold exposure at all. So that's
yeah,
that
exactly.
that was just them throwing out an organization to make you feel secure, but it was total bullcrap because I mean the EPA
Mm,
hasn't even set guidelines on acceptable levels of mold exposure, and OSHA is really more designed to just have safety in the workplace, and they have like absolutely nothing to do with any regulations regarding acceptable levels of mold. So yeah, I can see why after you sent them the results are like, ooh, wow, this person actually knows what they're doing.
yeah, it was really frustrating, and it was an uphill battle that I knew I was just not going to win. And at that moment, I had to choose like my health. It's like, do I choose my health over, whatever a job? And my health wins every single time. And
Sure.
so I ended up leaving because I was like, it's just not worth not feeling good. And so
Yeah, no.
tough decision, but ultimately I'm grateful because it ended up I love what I do now, and I'm super grateful that I get to do what I'm passionate about and keep my body healthy at the same time. So
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So it sounds like you took this opportunity to really take something that was affecting you and turn it into something that you are now passionately helping others with.
yes, absolutely. I think all of our struggles definitely kind of eventually lend itself to helping others in some way, because someone else's, your struggles, or someone else is probably going through exactly what you're
Yeah.
going through. And so yeah, so I'm really grateful that I get to kind of help others that are probably in that same boat and struggling with that.
Yeah, I'm also grateful for that because more help is needed on this front with respects to fixing the environments and fixing what's going on inside the body. It's really important. You brought up Hashimoto's earlier, and so I want to kind of link those two together. If you follow me on Instagram, I just did a post on mast cell activation syndrome and how it relates to mold. And Hashimoto's, I think, is scheduled for 2 weeks from now. So would love to hear your insight, and I think others may as well. Like I said, I've had clients who have had Hashimoto's, and they're diagnosed with Hashimoto's, but the environment they're living in is really causing some serious health impacts. I would love to just for you to dive into how you feel that mold plays a role in Hashimoto's, and if there's anything from experience you can give as guidance would be great.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely connected. I mean, it was for me kind of like a missing link. Like I was one of those people that I had changed my diet, I had done all these things, but I was still symptomatic and I couldn't figure out why. And when we're not able to eat food, like healthy food, and reintroduce things back into our diet, then there's a reason for that. And yeah, I mean, the thyroid and your immune system, mold just wreaks havoc on all of it. And
Sure.
we don't often even think about, emotional well-being and just feeling like you're going crazy and you have all this anxiety. And it's like, where is this coming from? So, I mean, there's so many different places it can come from, but we never
Yeah.
stop to think about mold. And it's tricky because not everybody has the ability to just pick up and move. And you know, I was lucky in the sense in my last place, I actually just got out of a moldy place like 4 months ago,
Wow.
and was very sick living in that place for 2 years. And after 4 months, I'm already feeling so much better, but I'm still recovering from it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like it's kind of been the lingering reason why I still have elevated TPO antibodies. So with
Okay.
Hashimoto's disease, the autoimmune response. And I feel that that has been the reason why I have not been able to fully bring them down into remission. Um, because it's like I've been living in that environment for so long, and my immune system was like, wait a minute, like this isn't healthy for you. I recognize something, I don't recognize this. And I
Yeah.
think it's been the lingering thing for me in fully getting to remission. So when we feel like we're doing everything right with diet and supplements and self-care and all of these things, but we're still not kind of seeing those results on paper, then it's really important to kind of look at, okay, like maybe there's something else to this. Maybe there's something in our environment that's triggering it. And that's definitely been my case.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's awesome that you figure that out, because I think a lot of people, they're blind to the environmental exposure element of things, because we've never really been taught that. We're taught that when you are sick, you go to the doctor, and the doctor gives you a pill and then makes you all better, and that's really what medicine, Western medicine, the whole practice really consists of. And so we've never really had this thing where, well, you go to the doctor and the doctor's like, well, you're sick. Okay, well, why did you get sick? And how does your environment look? Do you have any recent water damage events? Is there any, are you live by a golf course, maybe you're exposed to glyphosate? Like, there's none of that. You just go to the doctor. Yeah, you got a 99.1 fever, low grade fever, take some Tylenol, and, I can see your fluids are a little messed up. We're going to go ahead and prescribe you an antibiotic. Like, it's just, that's what it is. And it's interesting is we've because of that, we've never really been educated on the fact that diets are important. We have heard, the objectifications of the society, which tells you want to eat a specific diet to look a certain way, but really that's all in comparison to looks and not how you feel. We've never looked at really environmental exposures until very recently. It's definitely a new trend, one that's extremely important, extremely vital, because I have my own opinions about environmental exposures either causing or exacerbating many, many conditions, probably more than we would like to admit, in terms of, because what's interesting about this is we can look at Lyme disease, and we know that mold exposure definitely prolongs Lyme disease, definitely makes Lyme disease very difficult to recover from. We have Hashimoto's, which we're talking about today. We have asthma. We have mast cell activation syndrome. We have SEERS. I mean, you can create all these different baskets, put a bunch of different names together, and all of them have one very important thing in common. The environmental exposure is preventing them from healing. And I think that's very interesting, because you talked about a little bit about neurological effects. Well, let's go to the insane asylum tomorrow. Let's figure out how many of those people actually became neurologically impacted due to their environment. I guarantee you it's a large percentage. I think this is a bigger problem than we let on. And, it's why I'm so passionate about getting down to the root cause of things and trying to figure this out. And that's why I love the newer schools of thought in medicine, where you're trying to figure out the root cause of the problem. And I love when medicine looks at the environmental exposures as well, because I think that's a complete package. Because when you look at health, you have genetics, you have predispositions, right, to these illnesses, and then you have environmental exposures, which, by the way, can impact the other two categories also. So when you look at that, you're like, wow, environmental exposure is a big thing. You have to be cognizant of it. Otherwise, doesn't matter how good you are, what you're doing, you're still living in the problem. And so, I think it's just so important. I really appreciate kind of you taking the time to talk about that. One thing that I realized, just to take a step back, is I realize there's probably people listening to this that may not even know what Hashimoto's is. So why don't we start there too? What is Hashimoto's, and what are some of the effects that you feel when you have Hashimoto's?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So Hashimoto's is one of the most common autoimmune diseases out there. And most people think it's just a thyroid problem, but it's actually your immune system that gets all whacked out. So it's basically when your immune system is attacking your thyroid and causes your thyroid to go out of whack. So when we get diagnosed with Hashimoto's disease, we really want to look at our immune system that's been thrown off. And and mold is definitely one of those factors that can throw our immune system all out of whack.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I just, I realized when talking about Hashimoto's, I mean, you and I know what it is, but I just realized there may be people who are like, I wonder what that is. So I thought it'd be good to just cover the basics of that. Yeah, you covered this earlier, but a lot of clients, they go from doctor to doctor to doctor to doctor, almost endlessly before they finally figure out what's going on. You actually said off camera earlier that you diagnosed this problem yourself, just trying to figure out the environmental exposure element, as you will, because you were feeling worse inside your place, worse when you were at work, but when you were staying in other places, you felt much better. But I'm curious, how many doctors did you have to go through before you came to that conclusion on your own?
Yeah, that's a good question. I want to say, I mean, luckily, I was one of those people that when I saw a Western conventional doctor, I probably only saw about two of them. And I consider myself very lucky with that, because most people, it takes them forever to finally figure out what's going on. But I was like, something in my gut told me that whatever they told me was not correct. And I knew there had to be another way. So I feel very lucky because I took action things very early on in my journey and was like, I don't believe you. And so,
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I've probably gone through maybe 2 or 3 other natural doctors. And really just had to advocate for myself in knowing what tests I needed and to kind of figure out what was going on. I also have some local friends who have Lyme disease and who have other things going on with their bodies who have already gone through the journey with mold and things like that. So I've had some support, moral support in knowing what to ask for and basically how to detox from mold and things like that. So I feel very lucky it didn't take me as long as I feel like most people, but still I've had to go through a lot of doctors to still kind of figure out what was going on.
Yeah, no, that is fortunate that you were able to come to that conclusion sooner, because obviously the more doctors you go through, the more money you're spending. They're telling you, they're running all these types of tests and nothing's coming back abnormal. You're like, what's wrong with me? It's very frustrating. But so you had some friends that kind of clued you in. Were you telling your friends like, hey, this is how I'm feeling, this is what's going on, and then they said, you may want to get your house checked for mold? Is that kind of how things went?
I have one of my best friends that lives locally here. We actually met through the online space, and she was a little bit further ahead of discovering things on her journey, and she was the one that kind of told me like to check for mold, because she had gone through horrific mold experiences herself. So I'm lucky that I was able to kind of hear her experiences and then learn to advocate for myself right then.
That's awesome.
That it's that awareness piece. Like when we know better, we do better. And until we know what to do, it can just be this endless cycle of frustration.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. No, I'm glad you had a support system. I'm sure that definitely helped kind of clue you in sooner. And, looking online today, as opposed to 10 years ago, you have all these Facebook groups with mold support groups and stuff like that, which has really been, well, it's like a gift and a curse, because unfortunately you have some good information that gets shared, but also some bad. And you still have to do some due diligence and cipher through things and talk to some experts. And well, you even have to be careful with some experts, because they're everybody has a product they're selling these days. And it's hard to navigate, but you got to do due diligence and really put together a good team. And what I love about a team is, if everybody on the team's agreeing this is the best path forward, you really understand that there's different experts in different fields kind of aligning themselves on the same path. That you're going to have a much better chance for success. When you have, a testing company telling you one thing and a remediation company telling you something else, and then the doctor's saying something different, you don't really have an aligned team, and it's not going to be successful. You got to get yourself aligned with a team, I think, to really make things successful. What were some of your symptoms that you experienced with respects to mold? There's obviously a lot of different common ones, but what's interesting about this is every person I talk to, they have very unique sets of symptoms for themselves, with some of the common ones that you hear about, but would love your take on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I have had so many instances of being in and out of mold, and each time I think they were different. So that's what was so interesting as well. And they kind of changed depending on where I was. So for me, it was I think I had like those food allergies, like constant gut issues that just would not go away. I had been on every gut healing protocol known to man, and nothing was working. Um, and I think for me, a big one was just everything shows up on my skin. Like that's how my body tells me that something is off. I
Yeah.
had rashes just all over my hands and my arms. And I think another big one was sleep. I just could not sleep. And even today, I'm still working on like getting my body to sleep. And so I had horrible insomnia. I would get, my hands would get numb at night too. So it'd feel like it would just feel really heavy. Um, and you know, the fatigue, which is, you know, people are like, oh, this is just normal part of being Hashimoto's disease, right? But it's not normal to feel
Yeah.
tired all the time. And then when I was living in my last place 4 months ago, I had gained a bunch of weight again. So I had lost all this weight because you know, I had changed my diet and I was, you know, doing really healthy things, and then it just, the weight gain came on out of nowhere, and it
Wow.
was like no matter what I ate, I could not lose the weight. And so I knew it had to be toxin related, because it's like if your diet is of no use, then we want to look at toxins. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I had gained probably 10-15 pounds more than I had weighed, like for me, what would consider a healthy weight. So
Right.
that was a big one for me that I knew was it was mold. So yeah, those were some of mine. Trying to think of other ones I had. I think blurry vision. I also had brain fog is such a common one with thyroid too. So yeah, I had almost all of the,
Yeah.
a lot of symptoms. Yeah.
Yeah, I too battle with different things of being in and out of people's social for the last 10 years, even with the best equipment. It's not perfect. It's 99%. It's not 100%. And so, I myself have battled some of that. And I think weight gain for me was one of the biggest ones that I'm still dealing with. And I've tried all different types of diets. Like when you look at calories in versus calories out, it doesn't make any sense. So it's very interesting phenomenon. And having to constantly, check levels of, different things inside the body and try to tweak things. It's frustrating, right? And I know personally, I'm still dealing with it every single day, and it's frustrating. And I work out every day, and I eat, a really good diet, right? So it's interesting how your body, the whole composition can change when your exposure changes, which I've noticed. And yeah, I understand, and it's interesting because, like you said, there's different symptoms depending on where you were. It makes a lot of sense because odds are you had different species of mold present, right, at different locations with different quantities, which is, why that whole phrase mold is ubiquitous, so it can't harm you. It couldn't be further from the truth because you actually can have different reactions to different molds present. And, as we know, mold's a blanket term to describe over 100,000 different species. So, glad we can debunk that and really take importance into making sure that our environments are healthy. How did mold exposure in particular impact your everyday life and just your ability to do normal everyday activities?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's you know, whenever you have Hashimoto's disease, and then, you know, and then you have the mold on, when you have the mold on top of it, it does impact everything. When you're fatigued all the time, you feel like you can't do anything because you're so tired. And I think when my symptoms first started, is when I was back when I was teaching, and it was embarrassing because I would be standing in front of a group of children and my brain fog would kick in and I couldn't even remember what I was saying and put sentences together. So because my brain fog was so bad, being in that moldy environment. And so it just can feel really embarrassing because you're like, what is causing this? And why isn't my brain functioning? So
Yeah.
I think that was a big one for me. And that really impacted my life, because you start to like doubt yourself when you can't remember like simple things you're talking about. You can't remember, from one moment to the next what you're doing. And so, yeah, that was a big one for me in how it impacted my day to day. And I think you're just always thinking about like what's causing these gut issues, what's causing all these rashes. And it's just constantly this stressor. It's kind of this like cycle of stress, right? Like,
Yeah.
where's this from? What is causing it? And then it causes more stress on the body. And then it's just this cycle all over again.
Yeah.
So,
You're like, you're in that dwindling spiral for sure.
mhm.
Do you remember like the worst day that you had ever experienced? And do you mind? And I know this may be difficult to relive, but I think it might be helpful for others who may have had similar experiences. What was that like? Your worst day ever, and how did you make it through that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's tough because I don't know that I can pinpoint like one specific day. I think
Okay.
it's just been like a chunk of time. I would say, like chunks of time where it's just was really bad. And I just
Okay.
felt like hopeless. And just like you feel like, am I ever going to get better? Am I ever going to get to the bottom of this? And you kind of go down that spiral too, when it just feels like an uphill battle and you make a couple steps forward, 5 steps back, and you just
Yeah.
go down the cycle of feeling hopeless. And so I don't know that there's one specific day. I think there's just been chunks of time or even maybe weeks where I just didn't have
Yeah.
good weeks. And there'll be days when, it feels better than others. And I think, that's just a part of the roller coaster of
Yeah.
autoimmunity. That's just the nature of it. So, yeah, I can't think of one particular day, but I would just say there's been lots of um, time periods where it was just really bad and I just felt like hopeless.
Yeah, no, I appreciate, I appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing that, and I understand that's difficult to relive and think about sometimes. But yeah, look, for some people, there's like the worst day they ever had, and for some people, it's a chunk of days, right? It's just this perpetual not feeling well for periods of time. So no, it's good to identify that. Um, I wanna start talking about the positive because we talk a lot about what you go through negatively. But there is a happy story to this, right? You've gotten out of the mold. You're starting the process of healing. You've turned that into an empowering way to help others. Really would love to dive into that. So when did you actually start to feel better?
That's a good question. I feel like I started to feel better. I mean, most recently, actually, this is like pretty recent because I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
I've been in and out of it for so long. I think I recently just moved out of a really, really moldy place 4 months ago, and up until recently, I'm just now starting to feel better, and I'm still in recovery, and I'm moving again actually next week, so we'll see how that goes.
okay,
Um, but yeah, I think I'm just now starting to recover. I've been doing some really deep, like mold recovery with my body internally, and starting to really feel better. But it takes time. So I'm just trying to be patient with my body because it's not an
yeah,
over process. I've been in
yeah,
and out of mold for the past like 9 years. So I know it's not going to miraculously go away overnight. So it's
yeah.
still healing from it, but definitely better than where I was.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad you're over the hump, and yeah, I think it's important to highlight that it's not a light switch that just turns on and off. Like you actually have to start the healing process, and there's levels to it, right? You start to feel incrementally better, as you get to each new plateau and new frontier that you're, on your road to recovery. And I think that's important to, for people to understand that it's not just as simple as move out tomorrow. Tomorrow you're back to normal. Um, what would you recommend to others who are going through similar challenges?
Yeah, I would just, my philosophy, and I always share this with like my community, is like control the controllables. Like it is really overwhelming and it can actually be more stressful when you're thinking about, because mold is literally everywhere, is I
Sure.
just feel so unavoidable in a lot of cases. So I think my biggest piece of advice is to control the controllables and do what you can with what you have, because it can be very costly to fix. It can be,
Sure.
there's just so many factors that go into it, both externally and internally, and all of these things we have to do to feel better. So I guess my piece of advice is always to control what you can and do what you can with what you have. So
I love
'cause
that. Control the controllables. I love that.
that's
That's a
yeah,
great one. That's
that's
awesome.
my
Well, that's a good sentiment, and you should definitely continue to pass that on because you're right. I think one of the most stressful things to worry about is things that you're not in your control, right? And I think that's where mentally you can get stuck into dark places because if you're trying to control everything, even the things you can't control, then you're not going to have enough wins to keep going, right? Because how do you get wins? Well, by controlling the things that you can control. And you control enough of those things and everything else kind of starts to align up into place. But when you're trying to control everything all at one shot, you tend to have some losses there, and it tends to add more to the stress, anxiety, and frustration. So I absolutely love that. I think that's a great one, and hope you continue to share that. So I typically that's all the questions that I have, but I have more because what I think is wonderful for you is you've turned this around into a way to help others, and I would love to learn more about that, and I totally get why it's amazing, and so what do you currently do for your clients? How do you help them? What is that like? And then I'm going to ask where people can find and reach out to you because I think that the world needs more people that understand what's going on with their environment, how it impacts them, and work with people that can help them. So would love for you to share some insight on that.
Yeah. Well, I do help clients in a variety of ways. I think education is like first and foremost, like so important. My philosophy is always when we know better, we do better.
Yeah.
And so I believe in education. I have a blog post all about my journey with Hashimoto's disease and with mold toxicity. I also have a protocol that I share with clients who want to take it, at their own pace, systematically, in my course, Hashimoto's 101. It's basically where I teach all my clients step by step on how to reverse their symptoms, how to advocate for themselves with testing, with environmental stuff, with all of that. And what else? Yeah, I think those are the two places, is Hashimoto's 101, and my blog post is a really great place to start with, advocating for yourself and knowing what tests to ask for and understanding your body, of why is maybe this is happening to me and maybe it's not happening to your spouse or someone else in your environment. It's just really getting to know your body and asking lots of questions. So yeah.
Well, I definitely want to get a copy of my book out to you because I would love for it to be a resource for your clients as well. Just learning about the environmental impacts and what they can do about it, because I think it's so important. It's very easy to be like, hey, your environment has some issues. You should get that checked out. But just to find someone that can do a proper job finding the issues and then finding someone that can actually remediate properly and fix those things, because if you're a renter and your landlord's taking care of this kind of stuff, odds are they're not going to find the right person. If you're a homeowner and you're trying to take care of this stuff, it's so far and few between. Like there's 50,000 companies that are mold professionals. Probably 1% of them actually know what they're doing. That's scary, but that's the reality that we face with. So I think it's so important, like to really, if you're going to do something about the environmental part of it, which obviously is important. And like you said, like sometimes just moving is not an option. You need to figure out how to fix it. I think having the right resource to do that is so key,
So I mostly hang out on Instagram. You can find me at Hope with Hashimoto's.
Okay.
Or you can go to hopewithhashimoto's.com for all my other information, resources, products, all the things.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much for being here. And, by the way, I mean, I feel like the lawnmower people always come at like the worst timing. It's like always in the middle of a podcast, happens exactly to me all the time. So no worries there. But yeah, I want to thank you so much for helping me raise this topic. And thank you for providing information where people can contact you. And I hope that you can continue to help people. And let's connect again in the future. Thank you so much.